We have almost done full circle with the Mavic 3 Classic, but one of the questions that I see very often is how good is the obstacle avoidance? You know, the Mavic 3 Classic comes with full 360 degrees obstacle avoidance. It has sensors on the front, back, on the bottom and on the top, but it also is built in a way so the sensors are protecting the sides of the drone. It's not dedicated side sensors, but the wide angle lens of the front and back sensors are wide enough to cover the sides of the drone. It's very easy to be convinced about the performance of the obstacle avoidance system if you just stand in a fixed location flying the drone around and just see it dodge different obstacles. But where you're gonna max out the performance is if you use it as part of active track. And this is exactly what I'm gonna show you. I set my mind out for doing a quite comprehensive test. And of course I wanted something that was pretty for you to look at. So I chose my vintage Corvette as the tracking object. You will see a few things in this video. You will see how it tracks avoiding obstacles. That's one thing. You would see if it's possible to do a perfect parallel track. You will also see the 50-meter limitation in action between the object and drone that has been introduced as part of making the drone C1 compliant. So is the obstacle avoidance perfect? No, not at all, especially not if you have like a reckless idiot behind the controls. So if you watch the video to the end, I will show you an example that could have gone really wrong. And you tell me if it's the obstacle avoidance that saved the drone or it was my superior piloting skills. The first location was an alley with some trees where we could sort of test the capabilities of the drone dodging the obstacles, and it was located in a quiet industrial area. So I went into the settings and made sure that the bypass option was selected. Also, I wanted to make sure that the drone didn't return to home in case that I lost the signal. It's a much better option to just let it sit and hover, especially if the home position is far away, then you might run into problems that you have to go back and fetch the drone and all sorts of stuff. So I felt a lot more comfortable just letting the drone sit and hover in case that I lost signal. Then we're ready, fire up the engine, position the drone and select the car. And as you can see on the icon below here, the drone automatically recognizes that it's a car. Also, you might notice that we are recording in 4K 30 FPS, and that is because that's the limitation of tracking on this drone. You can't go higher than that. And then press go. Then we're pulling up the new control, and I actually don't know if that is new, but I've never seen this before with the Mini 3 Pro. But there's this wheel that will allow you to position the drone relatively to the subject. I repositioned the drone, and in this example, I just chose that it should track from behind in a nice height, and we're ready for some action. See, now it goes below the trees. You can see this oval ring around the tracking object that is lighting orange and red, and that's sort of the indication what the sensors of the drone are seeing. And it senses there are obstacles on the side. In this case, it chose to go up and around, and then it goes around the corner here nicely, dodging all the trees. It's a little bit close, but it's actually handling it pretty good. For the next test, I decided to raise the drone and just see if it could follow me top down for a longer period. And it would be interesting to see how it interacts with other cars on the road. It stays nicely in the selected position behind the car. Now there's a car coming against us. There's absolutely no problem, no confusion at all. So now we're going around the corner here. And a fun story is here on the left, the white car, that's actually a driving school car, and the teacher that is educating the students in driving was sort of offloading something there. So while I was driving by, she got eye contact with me, and then she was looking up towards the drone, and I'm pretty sure that she said, but it's a C1 drone, and I didn't deliberately fly over her, so there's no issues there. So it still follows very nicely along. And then there's a parking lot here down at the left side where I decided to turn the car and drive in the opposite direction. And here the sensors really got into work because of the trees. I don't know why it kind of moved to the side of the car because we asked it to stay behind it. But maybe it got confused when I turned below the trees. But it doesn't lose track of the car. So when I back out again, it's actually still tracking the car, even though a lot of it was covered by the leaves on the branches. So now the mandatory test with tracking. Can you position the drone in front and will it stay there? So right now I'm a bit confused because I selected front and it's positioning itself in the back. So maybe it doesn't know which way is front and back. So I finally decided to say, well, let's see what happens. So when I start to drive, it actually shifts around and gets in front of the car. So I don't know why it didn't do that from the start. And it actually stays there and holds the position pretty nicely. At that point, I decided to take over manual control, land the drone so we could drive to the next location where we're gonna test the parallel track. So I start by positioning the drone here in this really nice location with trees in the background. So this is quite a challenge for the drone, I guess, to do this. So I put it out there somewhere. And then I select that it should go on the right side of the car. So I start to drive very carefully. And in the beginning here, it's not going particularly well, but then it corrects itself. It's still not on the side of the car, but it's working on it. And there's some limitation to how fast we can do this. I will do a speed test with the active track at some point so we can get sort of an idea how fast is possible. But right now it's actually doing a pretty nice job tracking the car from the side. And there's a lot of objects here that it can get confused. Now straight ahead, there's some challenges and I want to test a little bit more about the speed of the drone. So I just decided to park on the roadside here and then reposition the drone. And looking at the footage, this big truck that just passed me, that was a really huge one. So I'm using the zoom capabilities now, and that's a pretty smart trick to kind of make an illusion that the drone is a lot closer to the car than it actually is. So now it was supposed to stay on the side here, and it's and also it makes objects that it passes by look like they are a lot closer, as you just saw with these bushes. So now straight ahead there's some private property that I don't want to fly over, so I have to reposition the drone. There's also some branches that are hanging over the road, and I want to try and increase the velocity a bit, so also to show you what happens when you drive along a normal road with some of the most common obstacles that you will find there. So here we go. And it has no problems tracking the car also below the branches here. And it stays nicely locked there. Again, the car is almost 100% covered, but it still figures out to track it. Further down the road, there was some power lines and I was not really sure how the drone would be able to handle that in combination with speed. So I decided to land the drone there and sort of conclude that part of the testing. And in case you are wondering, this is a Corvette Stingray from 1970. It's a convertible. That's only made around maybe 6,700 of these cars in that year. There was a strike going on the GM factory, so they got a late start. So not many cars were produced in 1970. It's a 350 small block, 5.7 liters with around, I think it has 330 horsepower. Because the headers have been modified. Those are like Edelbrock Performer headers or something like that. That's a really, really fun toy, and I managed to complete this video just before I had to tuck it away for the winter. I don't want this car anywhere near salty roads. Even though the chassis is fiberglass, there's still a lot of other parts that can rust in case that it gets in contact with salt. So I thought I would do some extra footage for this video, but in some situations you get into this limitation that was introduced as part of making the drone C1 compliant for the European market. Or for the EU. I can't say the European market, then the British guys will get angry at me. So for the EU, flying under the EASA drone regulation. So see here, now it tracks a little bit and then the distance gets too far. So it says here, the Commission Delegated Regulation EU, the Class 1 unmanned aircraft system requires a distance between aircraft and subjects should be within 50 meters following. Unable to continue active track. So basically, when that happens, the drone just sits there and hovering while you drive away. It's not 100% clear to me how it determines that distance, and it seems, at least from my experience with the drone right now, that it's not very consistent. I promised you to show you an example where everything was starting to go really, really wrong. Just prior to testing the parallel tracking, in the preparation, this happened. So I was parked nicely on the side of the road, and I was trying to position the drone, putting it up in an appropriate distance. I was sort of figuring what would look nice and what... And then, in the heat of the battle, I selected left instead of right. And when I pressed go and started to drive, the drone of course attempted to position itself on the left side of the subject. That was filled with trees. The drone decided to go down and position itself below the trees. And as you may spot in the horizon, a car is approaching and it's approaching fast. So the drone decides to position itself in windshield height in the same lane as the car is approaching. I was getting a little bit under pressure there, but I thought my only option would be to pull up and then let the sensors do the work. And this is real time. Here you see, I press up the drone and there the car goes by. So it was just a matter of seconds before this could have ended into something that would have been less pleasant. And you can see the drone is doing a pretty fine job avoiding all the branches that are hanging up there. Would it have been fast enough to avoid the car that was driving under it? I'm not really sure. But at least it assisted me very nicely when I decided to increase the altitude, preventing it from colliding with the trees. I'm not sure it would have ended that well with an Air 2S or Mini 3 Pro or any other drone without side protection. So lesson learned, but it really makes me appreciate the obstacle avoidance that is included with the Mavic 3 Classic. So in case you have decided to upgrade for your Mavic 3 Classic, there are of course links in the description below. Also, if you want to see some of the other videos that I've made around this fantastic drone, you will be able to access those through this card. I hope you liked this video. If you did, then feel free to give it a like. If you didn't like it, feel free to press the dislike button twice. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you around.